without ever given an explanation about why I was having these sudden period problems. They diagnosed that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. They prescribed birth control and basically just said, you're not going to get pregnant. You just come back when you're ready and we'll give you medication.
I'm Heather Grzych, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrzych.com or on Instagram at heathergrzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Welcome back to the Wisdom of the Body. Today I'm here with Hannah Bowers. Hannah is an integrative nutrition health coach, a certified lactation counselor, and hosts a podcast called the Baby Dust Fertility Podcast. And she's a writer who's passionate about supporting women from preconception and infertility through postpartum. And I'm excited for you all to meet Hannah today. Thanks for being here, Hannah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for inviting me to come and be on your podcast.
I was so excited to talk with you, especially when you told me that you're currently pregnant. I was like, wow, we could just have, go in a lot of different directions. So, yeah. So why don't you tell me, first of all, because you're a health coach and you said you've been a health coach for I think 5 years, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But you've been interested and had this passion and interest in fertility from before that. So what kind of got you interested in fertility and infertility?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like to give the full context, I have to go back even a little bit before that journey started. My husband and I got married and I was pretty young, and I worked a job that was odd hours. We worked evenings, we worked late in the afternoon. So I had a lot of time during the day. And we lived in this adorable little town, and I would ride my bike to the library. And actually, I'd ride from my house to the library, to the thrift store, to the grocery store, and home, because that's how small our town was. And I was one day just in the library thinking, I don't really know what I have an interest in. I don't know what to explore. I just need to find something. And somehow I ended up picking up Aviva Romm's pregnancy book. And I was like, okay, this looks interesting. I kind of liked natural stuff. I liked food. I liked health stuff. Let's just take this home. And I suddenly found myself absolutely captivated by this world of pregnancy. And it was really the first time that it ever even occurred to me that women's health, the spectrum of, all the different stages that we go through as women, was this really cool thing that I could dive into. So I just kind of started as a hobbyist, reading whatever I could get at the library. We couldn't get a lot, so I read through it fairly quickly. And so that was just kind of it piqued my interest. Well, not long after we were married, I noticed that I was having some period problems. Went into the OBGYN who I'd seen once or twice. And really, I was reflecting on this actually earlier, really without ever given an explanation about why I was having these sudden period problems. They diagnosed that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. They prescribed birth control, and they basically just said, you're not going to get pregnant. You just come back when you're ready and we'll give you medication. And that was came out of left field because we weren't there, because we were trying to have a baby. We were not even thinking about that at this time. And so my husband, who tends to be super rational, I so appreciate him. He's just been amazing throughout this whole journey of personally and then transitioning into this as my work. And he's like, well, let's go to the other medical system in our town. We had 2. Let's go and see someone over there, and maybe they'll kind of give us a little bit of a different input. But we went over there. We went to see this OBGYN that we could get into, and same experience. We walked through the door. It was actually a really unpleasant appointment. I don't know if we caught the doctor on a bad day or what. He wasn't super friendly or interested in conversing, but he basically reiterated the exact same thing the first OBGYN had said. And we left there, and it was kind of this doesn't sit well. it doesn't sit well to just kind of go in, just kind of be like handed this prescription, sent on our way without ever really digging in underneath and trying to figure out what was going on. And so I remember feeling frustrated, kind of like a little bit like I hadn't really been heard. And my husband was like, don't worry about it. Why don't we just start digging in to what we can do for supporting your body, helping, with all of this, periods, whatnot. And then we'll just try to learn what we can, and then we'll go from there. And so it started out as really just this like need for discovery of like, okay, there's got to be more. There's got to be something that I should know. And at that time, there really wasn't a whole lot of consumer geared information. It was, if you wanted to learn it, you had to go find the study. You had to figure out how to read the study, because I did not have any sort of scientific or medical background. I had at that time not attended college. I was pretty green. And so you just kind of had to dig in and figure it out. And slowly, as we started pulling away the layers and the pieces and reading this and reading that, it was like this light bulb went off, and it's like, oh my goodness, there's so much here. So much. Like, there are so many options. There are so many interventions that you can implement. And so that's what we started doing, was just implementing these changes, trying to identify some of the key things that could be helpful. And what started out as that need for myself to like, we got to figure this out, has just blossomed into this passion of like, wow, why don't we know this? Why don't other women know this? Like, I want women to experience this excitement. Like, there's so much within your control that you can do. And so that's really what led me here and got me to this place of now working as a health coach. Fertility focus is primarily where I've been, but I do support the full spectrum of fertility all the way through postpartum. I love every stage of that. So yeah, so that's been the journey.
This is such a common sentiment that it's almost like women at some point have like a fertility awakening, where they say like in yoga, you have a Kundalini awakening, or there's all that, you have a spiritual awakening. People have all these different kinds of awakenings. And I think at some point women go through a fertility awakening, and it's this recognition that like, okay, I actually can do some stuff that influences my fertility. And I may not know what those things are, but I want to find out. And where are those resources? And it's really sad. I think the story that you said is one that so many women have experienced. And it's sad, but I think we've developed this expectation that doctors in the mainstream medical system are going to be able to help us solve problems that are solvable through essentially natural regenerative kinds of therapies, where we do something and then our body regenerates in a different way. Right. But that model is not set up for that, because you probably only had a very short visit. And I know, like, when you work with people, my first consultation with somebody is like 90 minutes. You can't get down, like you were saying, you wanted to get under the surface. You can't get there in 15 minutes. You just can't. So the only tool they can give you is like, here is a drug, here is a whatever. Now, I love that like nutrition is such a big part of this, right? And I'd love to hear how that played a role in your healing of the diagnoses that you received, in that moment, because nutrition is clearly like a very underutilized therapeutic asset in medicine. So can you tell us a little bit about that, like how nutrition played a part?
Yeah. So, I feel like as we grow, as we learn, our approach evolves. And I look back to when we had conceived our older son. He's now 6. And I really didn't know a lot about food and nutrition. I kind of did my best. I've always had a little bit of a specialized diet, but, just tried to do a little better. I knew that I needed to eat more. For me, that was a big thing. I needed to just be consuming more food. I think a lot of women fall into that category with me. And so for that first journey, a lot of what we did was just focus on consuming more food, utilizing some really intentional and strategic supplements to replace some nutrients that we had identified that were like key. But really, it kicked into gear when we were working towards conceiving our second son. He's 3 now. And food was like the foundation to what I was doing at that time. Again, having to eat more, but not just my nutrition knowledge had evolved so much that I was starting to understand the value of certain nutrients for fertility. And so instead of just prioritizing, okay, I gotta eat more, I've got to get more in my mouth, it was like, okay, let's think about how we can do this and also maximize the different nutrients that I am consuming so that we can, try to flood this body with as many good things as possible. And so that's where I started really focusing on protein, thinking about, okay, am I actually eating enough protein? Which, no shock here, I needed to really ramp up the protein category. I think it was maybe, meeting the RDA, which is like really low, let alone hitting a threshold that was going to be therapeutic for my body and therapeutic for my hormones and my ovaries and, like everything, all those parts that we think about. And so then I was thinking about, well, what does it look like as far as my vegetable consumption? Am I getting a broad spectrum of nutrients, or am I kind of just hanging out in some of these like basic foods? Am I eating the same thing over and over again? And so suddenly it was like, okay, I can do something here. I can actually be trying to increase the different types of foods I'm eating. Okay, instead of buying this, I do a little research before I go to the grocery store. I'm going to buy maybe collard greens this week because, I'd studied and read that they might be a little bit more nutrient dense. And I tasted them. And for some reason, collard greens are one of my favorite greens. I love them. And so, it started becoming more of this like relationship of experiencing these different foods and discovering that these really nutrient dense foods tasted really good and they made me feel really good. And so really tuning in there. And then, I feel like I'm kind of hitting just some of the big categories, but then thinking about like the fats in my diet. Was I really eating enough fat? Recognizing that I probably needed to increase there as well. And it's kind of there was definitely a mental element, I think, in this journey here. I come from a background where we did grow up eating really well. My mom worked really hard to get good quality food in the house, but I wouldn't say, thinking back to my upbringing, that we were not like in a position where my parents had like an abundance of all of this stuff just hanging around. We had whole food ingredients. And so there was like a mental thing that I had to get over with, like, okay, I'm going to have to spend more on this food and I'm going to have to buy more. And I mention that because I think that's a mental hurdle that a lot of us have to work through depending on our background. But it all kind of fed into itself, into this point of realizing that eating better was caring for myself. It was preparing myself for this wonderful, important task that I was hoping to, enter into, of having another baby. And it just had to be part of the journey. And, I think with our Williams pregnancy, I always try to eat intentional, but I really ramped that up, thinking even before the time that we were actually ready to start trying. And so I think in total it was about a year before I actually wanted to start. And I had to put on some weight in that time. That's been something that trying to get to a healthy weight has always been a struggle. I'm very tall. I seem to have a really high metabolism. So the caloric need that I have and the food need is just huge. And breastfeeding and, all these pieces. But I just can see, how eating and prioritizing eating and, making food something that's enjoyable. I wasn't force feeding myself. I wasn't trying to like choke down all of this, like, ugh, it doesn't taste good, but like actually trying to make it pleasant. It made such a difference.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. And it's funny because hearing you talk about needing to get in more food, it's so funny and so the opposite of like what my journey was and how I had to do a bunch of fasting to prepare for conception, which was wild.
Interesting.
Yeah, but what it speaks to is this idea that everybody's body really is different. And you even just said that. You're like, I have this kind of body. And that's one of the things that when I wrote the Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, I was like, okay, well, I knew a lot of people didn't know about Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is one of those things that helps you understand that your body is different, right? But I was like, maybe if I could reach some people that are interested in their fertility, I can help them see that their body is different and they can have permission. They can have permission to have a different body and they can have permission to do things that are different than what everybody else is doing because it's what their body needs. Because the narrative out there, especially you live in the Midwest, right? You live in the
Yep.
Midwest.
Heart of the Midwest.
Everybody around you is obese.
Yes.
So if you go by the narrative of everybody around you, you shouldn't eat more, but your body's different than theirs, It's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned that because, yeah, we do. We definitely, we moved away early on in our marriage. We lived in Colorado for a little while, which was really cool. And then we wanted to come back before our oldest son was born. And yeah, it was like this, like, whoa, culture shock almost of going from that environment to coming back to the Midwest, which, we grew up here, we'd been here, but we were so used to seeing just larger bodied people, which if you look up the Ohio stats, I'm in Ohio, we have very high rates of obesity, even down into children, which is really sad. But yeah, that's just, the thing that's always said, you eat too much, you eat less, that's kind of the narrative. But I really had to dig in. And it's something that I consciously have to do, not because I have any issues with eating. I have no problems eating, but it's just like this. I'm very active. I'm very tall. My sister and I talk about this all the time because she is the same build. She's an athlete, so she needs to eat even more than I do. But we just talk about this, about how with our height, with our size, we don't really gain weight, which is different than other people. We don't carry a lot of extra. And so, yeah, it's interesting to be, we have a different body type, and that doesn't make it good or bad. It doesn't make it better or worse. That's just the way that my body specifically functions.
Yeah, it's so cool. And, so everybody listening right now, I always say it's like you have to figure out what kind of animal you got here. What does your animal need? Okay, so knowing that you've got this sort of higher metabolism, higher, maybe like the speed factor is important, and how much, you're able to convert is quite high. And being pregnant now, because you're pregnant with your third kid, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
how are you feeling?
Pretty good. I've definitely hit the point where we're nearing the end. And so I'm starting to feel more tired again. But overall, I've felt good. I had great second trimester, great start into the third trimester. I still feel pretty energetic. It's just I need to rest a little more than I think I needed to a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. For anybody who hasn't been pregnant yet, it's like you're feeling sick in the first trimester, you're tired, you're going through this transition. Second trimester, you're like, and you could tell me if this was different than your experience, but the second trimester is the fun one because you're kind of like, all right, I got this thing, I'm pregnant, I'm used to it, like it's manageable, and I'm not giving birth anytime soon. So I can just kind of like chill. And, my lymphatic system, everything's still moving correctly and whatever, and I'm not getting like crazy heartburn yet, or stuffy noses, or tired, or back pain and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden things change in the third trimester, and as you get closer, and then it gets exciting, right? Because you're thinking ahead, and thinking about, because you've actually studied like even lactation, so you have clearly an interest in not just learning about yourself, but also helping other people. So, what are the things that you're doing right now that you're pregnant? What are the things that you're doing to prepare for your birth and postpartum period?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really, really see that postpartum period as being so important. And for me, I have a really unique factor. I have this chronic illness that has flared postpartum. So, this is something I see a wonderful integrative doctor who we work really, he's like managing very closely to kind of try to make sure that we go into that well nourished. And so, for me, going into postpartum with as much prep is just critical. So I want to have a great postpartum. I want to have a really great the next few months. I want to enjoy this baby. I want to feel like I can take my time of rest. That's really important to me, is being able to have that time of rest. I think it's not something we value in American culture. And I don't see it as some sign of weakness or anything like that. But, actually taking steps now while I'm still pregnant, while I am thinking about birth, I'm doing my breathing practice, I'm thinking through labor, I'm really trying to have repeated positive thoughts to associate with labor. Those are some of the things that I'm doing right now for that. But I'm also starting to prepare meals, meals that are nutrient dense, that are, well thought out, not just throwing in lasagnas into the freezer. Not that there's anything wrong with lasagna. Lasagna is delicious, but actually trying to think through like, what are the foods that are going to really be nourishing? I'm trying to think through like, what are the things that will be helpful in those first few weeks to help me feel like I have everything I need, help me feel like I can rest. Cause I think, as a go girl, because I love to go. My husband and I were just talking about this the other night. I rest on my ball in the evenings to get some all hands and knees time in. It's so nice. It relieves pressure. It's great for getting baby into optimal position. And I'm like, oh, I'm feeling tired. And he's like, just remember, you're like getting closer. You're getting toward the end. And so it's like, it's exciting, but also trying to think about that. Like soon we're going to be out of this phase where I feel super tired, where I'm not quite getting all of my stuff done that I like to normally do. And then we'll have this beautiful new baby, and then we'll relearn what life looks like. So figuring out what do I accomplish now with the energy I have so that when I do have this baby, I feel permission to rest. And so some of that is practical, some of that is food prep, bathroom stuff prep, thinking through like all those pieces, but some of it's really mental in like thinking through, okay, how do I give myself that release? So it's okay to just kind of step back for a little bit when the time comes. And I think it's that mental release part that can be the hardest to really dial in. And it's why, I think it's something that we have to start kind of like working on in our brains before we have the baby. Because, you can prep all the meals in the world, but if you haven't wrestled through whatever it is in your mind that might keep you from being able to sit, rest, give your body that chance to heal for however long that duration looks like for you. Hopefully you're able to rest for at least a week. Our midwife always requests that I rest for at least 2 weeks. I like to rest even a little longer as time allows and then reintroduce slowly life. But, figuring that out and figuring out how to mentally just get to that point where it's like, it's okay. This work right here that I'm doing is important, and seeing it for the value of what it is that time. So those are the things that I'm really focusing on right now. I did get out yesterday, did a little bit of curb walking while my boys rode their scooters up and down our cul-de-sac. It's one of the beautiful things about a cul-de-sac. They ride their scooters. I monitor them, but then I can curb walk. I don't have to worry about a car coming down. And so I'm doing those things. I like to do steps because I think that's just a really great practical thing. But yeah, just trying to balance the physical, the mental, and then just the general prep.
When I went to the Galapagos, God, almost 10 years ago at this point, I saw these birds, that were mating, and there were different types of boobies. These birds are called boobies, and they're very well known in the Galapagos because they were documented by Charles Darwin. And, I got to see these birds nesting together. And it's like hearing one of the words that kept coming up was like prepare, right? And it's like when you prepare, you feel like you're ready for what is going to come. And also, in order to prepare, you have to have some kind of sense of what might happen, right? And you've been through 2 other births, so you have some familiarity with what that experience is like. I guess, is there anything that you would tell yourself before the birth of your first that you know now that you wish you knew then?
That's a good question. So I do feel really fortunate with going into that first birth because, I'd shared that even before thinking about having kids, I'd already started down this journey of exploring pregnancy. I'd explored postpartum. I'd even read La Leche's League's Guide to Breastfeeding cover to cover. Like, I loved it. And so I felt like going into that first birth, it was a lot of eyes open wide. I mean, obviously, you can't ever fully have in your mind the idea of, the next steps until you've been through it. But I think one of the biggest things, and this might actually sound crazy, is that I think one of the biggest things that I look back on, and I would just reiterate to my young self, our family was about an hour and a half away, so we really didn't have a lot of support, was to just be okay with it, be okay with whatever that recovery looked like and not impose any sort of like expectation that it should look like getting back on your feet right away or doing this or doing that. And I think for the most part, I did a good job of that. When you move to a new community and then like 8 weeks later have a baby, you don't really have friends who are calling you up to come over. So I had the blessing in some ways of that where I was just at home. But then also just, I think I would reiterate to myself that, I think we moms intuitively know things. We have a hunch about how certain things should be done, when we should rest, how to comfort the baby, do these different things. And a lot of that comes to having to reconnect with that just intuitive knowing. And so I think I just remind myself of that, like if you feel there's a doubt, just pause and think about it for a minute. Sure, you can look something up. Sure, you can call someone. But I think there's just a lot there. I was just chatting on Instagram with a nutritionist who's really passionate about preconception and just that whole spectrum as well. And she has had, just from her sharing her story, I gather she's had just a beautiful pregnancy postpartum experience. And just acknowledging that, I think we sell ourselves short. Not that having a baby isn't this huge, incredible, but big thing. But I think sometimes we do sell ourselves short, that we might not be enough or we might not know enough or something. Because I think that that's something I would tell myself.
Yeah, it's definitely a different journey than like going to school, taking a test, like you're reading all the books and you're getting all the information. And it sounds like you had some great resources. And at the same time, you're like, how do I reconnect with this inner animal that knows, that like can feel things? Because, like for those people who maybe haven't looked into this yet for themselves, there's a conversation that takes place between mom and baby.
Mm-hmm.
In Ayurveda, we call it, I can't remember the Sanskrit word. My Sanskrit's a little rusty, is like a pregnant woman is a woman with two hearts. So you're a woman
That's
with two
beautiful.
hearts right now. So beautiful, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like the blood is being shared between you and the baby. And that's a conversation that's taking place on a deeper level, not with words, but with chemistry and energy. And that conversation is taking place, and you know what to crave and eat because that conversation is taking place. And then when the baby's born, when the baby puts the lips to the breast and the saliva goes in the breast and the milk goes into the baby's mouth, that's another conversation that's taking place. And then your ears are hearing the cries and the specific tones. And these are things that we don't even think about because we're so intellectual in our culture, but they're so visceral and so basic that, I mean, I really feel I'm just like, I loved being a mom, like with a new baby. It's like the most, I can't say like, because I've done a lot of meditation and a lot of yoga and all these things trying to find myself and, reach enlightenment and all that. But there's nothing to me more deeply connected than having a newborn baby, because you just get into that pure state of being, that sensory being, because there's so much information in our heads. There's so much, and some of it's irrelevant, but somebody really influential said it, so we believe it or whatever. Some of it's irrelevant. It's hard to like determine that sometimes. But knowing, so it's such a wonderful place that you're in. And it sounds like you've had a lot of really, really, really great learnings. So you were talking about foods that you're preparing for the postpartum period. We could call it the fourth trimester.
Mm-hmm. It's so fitting. I think that the trimester 3-month window it's like the graduation time frame of like exiting pregnancy, entering this new journey of motherhood. And it's not that you get to the end of that and it's like, oh yeah, I got this figured out. Because you don't. There's bumps in the road. But I think that's really a realistic time frame of how long it takes to just get your groove. And to feel like, you're starting to feel like yourself, getting back to normal. Well, I say normal doesn't really come back. But,
Yeah.
I think that's so fitting.
Yeah. It's an intense period, and it's so good to prepare for that. One of my clients is pregnant right now, and just think about moving, like you were saying, with parent support.
Mhm. Mhm.
I didn't have any family around me when I had my son, and I found that to be very overwhelming. I happened to have a lot of friends that would, help out, and I pack of moms, like, just made this really super close pack of mom friends, which was super helpful different than having family around, of course.
Yeah.
But, that period is really big for a lot of people. And to be in the right place when the birth happens is very important. And so this one woman is debating, like, should I move to where my parents live because I'll have more support, or should I stay where I am now? And there's so many things to consider, because there's also, what's the medical system like, where when you go there, what are the things that are important to you to build this nest, right? Like, so you have two other kids, you'd have to think about their school. You have to think about, if you want to have this time to rest, if that's a priority to you, then what are the things that will help you do that? So I think you have to know those things. For me, I was like, I just need to make sure I have a cleaning person that can come to my house, because I won't be able to clean, and I like to clean.
No, that's so practical. Such a good one. I actually been thinking in my head recently, do I want to like find someone for this like window of time? Because it really catches up to you if you're not cleaning and you're someone who likes to have it cleaned and then it's not clean. And that's like that in and of itself can be the breaking factor to being able to feel that permission to like, okay, I can rest in this postpartum, but no, I can't because the bathroom is dirty again.
Yeah. And then it's weird. I'm sort of reflecting as I'm speaking. I'm like, wow, listen to us privileged people talking about all these options that we have, and thinking about all the women that have babies that have to go to work, that don't have maternity benefits. That I do believe that the Biden administration has implemented, well, at least encourage the states to implement more postpartum, like care for Medicaid and things like that for women, which is really important for women to have support in that postpartum period. But, it's like, if you're a single mom and you're having a baby, I mean, just when you have your own child, you just realize how hard it is for some people, and how parents just really need a lot of support for their kids. And I don't think I really understood that before I had a child. And having gone through it, it just makes me so much more empathetic for a single parent. It's just insane. So does your family live around you now? Or are you still a little far from them?
Yeah, so we're an hour and 40 minutes from both of our parents. And we selected Columbus because my husband has brothers here. And also, it was a better fit. He's in software, and there's not really any software jobs when you go back to a rural community. So we settled here. And so we see our parents here and there. My husband's parents just came down this past weekend to watch our son play soccer, and my mom pops in now and then. So it's close enough that we're able to see them. We talk about this. Both of our parents still work full time, and one set still has kids in the home. The other one just graduated their last kid. And so, even though she still lives at home, she's going to college. But so it's been wonderful to be close. But in some ways, it doesn't feel like we're always close because there's no calling up and having them come, for a visit. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And I say that more in a reflective manner because I've talked to a lot of other moms recently who are in the exact same position, who have, they came to this area or somewhere else so that they could be closer to family, but, due to job or whatever the situation, didn't go back to their hometown, and kind of feel that same pull of like, mom and dad aren't that far away. They can realistically come here, but just because of life, they're not going to be coming regularly. It's like a planned visit or, like something here or there. And so I think it's an interesting spot to be in. I'm so grateful to be within close driving distance. We were 18 hours away before when we lived in Colorado, and that's far. It's hard to make a weekend trip, and we can at least, get back and do the day trip, or they come and do the day trip.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're bringing up is how, being a younger parent with parents that are still in the workforce. I mean, even so, I mean, my mom, I don't know, I think at least 1 or 2 decades older than you. My mom is only like in her early 70s and still works as well. And I had my first, my only kid when I was 40. So with people working longer, the family structures are really different than they may have been traditionally. One of my teachers was from Nepal, and she used to talk with us about how they lived in a multi-generational family situation in their
Mm.
house, where, there was the grandparents and then the parent generation and then the kids, and they would, all in Nepal, they live all together. And that is incredibly supportive for many reasons, including like when the women have their periods and, want a day of rest, they get to take that time. And it
Yeah.
was this
Wow.
really cool thing where they actually they have like a room in the house with all their creative projects and their knitting and stuff like that. And they would go and do that. Whereas some women sort of feel that as like a penalty, that they can't, like, I can't do what I want when I have my period. And some of us are like, we get a day off. Amazing.
That sounds great.
But I love that story. And I think that's what's super challenging culturally in America, is that we're such an individualist society that it's hard to get that multi-generational support. So the support structures that we build into our lives are so important. And what are some of the ways that you build that in, even though, I mean, your parents are fairly close, but what are some of the other ways you build in those support structures?
Yeah, so I feel like we've built a lot of our support structure through we've had church friends over the years that have become really close. And so those are people that I without a doubt could call up and be like, I need you. Actually, we have at times like we really need help. Can you help us? And yeah, they're right there because they feel more like family than they do friends. And we do have my husband's brothers here. Two of them are in the greater Columbus area. One of them is just a little bit further beyond that. And so we are all busy people, but if we need them, they are here. And so that's been a blessing just to have that community built in. But yeah, I think those are really the big ones. My son is in kindergarten. We homeschool. And so we have, started to really develop our connection with other homeschooling families in the area. And so these are like all these different little places that, we go, and we don't see all of these people all the time. We see some of them here, some of them there, some of them more frequently than others. But that's really, I feel like, where that community has come from. And I can definitely say, coming here, we've been back in Ohio for 7, I think, oh no, 6, almost 7 years, I think. Yes. And, going from coming back here and, even before them not really having community of friends. We met people when we lived more west, but we weren't there long enough to really cultivate those relationships. And so to come back here, enter into motherhood as, pretty much solo because I really didn't know anyone in Columbus. And then to kind of see over the course of time that develop out into, I have a handful of other moms now who some of them are, one of them, my really dear friend, is asked me recently, do you want a meal party? And we'll get together and make postpartum meals. And I thought, that's so, so sweet. That's amazing. And another friend has already said, I'll be coming over after your baby's born and I'll be coming to visit and bring you a meal and to make sure everything's going well. And so to just kind of like go through that journey personally of from like not having community to having community, it's just amazing to see, first of all, how it develops. But it's also, I just want to share that as the reminder that it doesn't always develop overnight, that sometimes it takes time to find those people. I know a ton of people now, a ton of wonderful people. Not everybody is, you just don't click like really close friends. That's nothing wrong with that. Other people are wonderful. But when you find those people that are like, wow, we get each other like so deeply, it's like so worth waiting for those relationships and cultivating those relationships because they do blossom and flourish if we're consistent to continue pursuing them.
It takes a village and it takes a moment to build the village.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And it sounds like you're doing some work as well with some fertility groups. You want to tell us a little bit about that and how people can get in contact with you?
Sure. So I host over on Facebook the Baby Dust Fertility Community. It's a place to connect with other people. Primarily, pretty much, it's all women in our community who are just trying to navigate the world of fertility and all ends of the spectrum. I really, really want to welcome people wherever they're at with whatever they're navigating. But a big thing I do try to do in that community is provide education, provide resources. It's out of that community that birthed the podcast. We just had this repeated request from our members saying, we want to hear from experts who have a track record working in the space of fertility, who, are not doing just the mainstream conventional thing, people who have like worked with complex cases that have introduced change. And so that has been just a joy and an excitement for me after my own journey of, discovering this amazing world of things that we can modify in our lives to improve fertility. And so I interview lots of great guests, which I know you're one of my guests. I'm so excited to get that episode out there, which I'm assuming by the time this airs that it's going to be out there. But just talking through those options. And so that's a great resource there. And in the group, you can find links to my free ebook. It shares basic cycle education, which I find it sounds so simple, but simply having this understanding of our bodies, understanding of what normal hormones look like, a lot of that simple stuff goes such a long way in just supporting the fertility journey and starting to get back in touch with the body. And so there's resources like that are there. You can also find that on my website, blissberrywellness.com, and connect with me on Instagram, because that's kind of the space where I'm trying to share some nuggets of insight and inspiration and encouragement. So those are all the places to connect.
Amazing. And thank you so much for sharing, your unique journey as well. I think that is just, there's probably some people listening who feel like maybe my body's kind of like hers and I could learn a thing or two there too, just like, because it's really nice to know that there are other animals that are like you.
Yeah, we're all out there. And I think one of the hardest things that I feel like I have identified just in observing both the benefit and the challenge of the internet is that sometimes there is this like underlying suggestion that, oh, we're just all the same. We can all just do the same things. It's going to be the same outcome. But, we are different. Our bodies respond differently to things, and we need different things in order to be well and be our best. And so, I hope that someone who's listening, maybe like me, will take some inspiration from some of the things that I found really helpful.
Thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate your time, Hannah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. If you are embarking on a fertility journey and are ready to have your mind blown about what your body is really capable of and how it's impacted by the environment, then check out my book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. You can actually download the introduction to the book for free on my website at heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. Read the intro for free and then buy the rest of this fertility enlightening book pretty much anywhere books are sold. You want a full human experience when you seek a healthcare provider, and you don't want 15 minutes with someone who can't even try to find out the root cause of things because they're so overwhelmed themselves. You have a body, a mind, a heart, and dare I say it, even emotions. You're not crazy. Everything does affect you, and it's possible to feel better if you have the support you need. Set up an appointment with me to heal naturally. Go to heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.